Lately, I've been trying to send you stories every day. But I feel like a large number of people who have signed up almost never come back to listen to the stories. I don't know where that is. Make you unhappy? I hope to receive comments and suggestions from you. And if you find the video good, please give me a like to give me more motivation. For those who have not yet subscribed, don't forget to click the subscribe button and press notification bell to wait for the next story. Now let's get into the story. Story 1. I have a very scary story to tell. I was out of work and was desperate for cash when I looked on Craigslist under gigs a few years back. I responded to several ads, ranging from painting to helping people move and cleaning. On a Sunday morning, somebody called me and told me they had some work. They said the job was to clean a kitchen inside a small building that was recently closed down, and he was renovating it. He needed me to show up and work in the evening, starting at 7 and ending at like 1 or 2 in the morning, and it was for only one night, and he would pay me $200 cash. That sounded great to me, and I had no problem with these hours, as my last job was a graveyard shift anyway. So the man I was talking to gave me the address, and I told him that I would be there on time at 7 o'clock. He sounded like a normal, nice guy. I showed up a little before 7 and approached the building. This building was amongst many others downtown but looked eerily lonely in the way that it had no windows and no lights were working outside in front of it. I thought it might have been a bar that was closed down or something. I knocked on the big wooden door. I heard noise coming from inside, and eventually a man opened up. He was tall, he had a goatee and looked to be in his 50s. He greeted me with a smile and asked me to come on in. There was a single lamp lighting the room we were in, and it indeed looked like an old bar. The room wrapped around another smaller room in the center of it. It looked as if he was painting the walls and working to fix the top of the bar, which was rotting old wood. He showed me to the center room, which was a kitchen. The kitchen was very dirty. A couple of old glasses were laying around. The oven was pulled from the wall, showing rotting drywall behind it. Sawdust and dirt was all over everything. He told me I was to clean this kitchen and to get as much done as possible before 2 in the morning, and he pointed out some cleaning products sitting on the ground by the wall with some rags to scrub with. I asked if he had any gloves, and he said no, but that the sink in the corner still worked, and I could clean my hands when I wanted with that. That sucked, and I was a bit hesitant to clean some of the stuff in here without gloves. But I remembered that $200 that he had promised, and I moved past my disappointment. He told me while I was cleaning he was going to be working outside at the bar. I asked where I should begin, and he said scrubbing the baseboards around the room. I told him that was cool, and he walked out of the room. Fast forwarding, I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, making a bit of progress, and I was getting very thirsty. I told myself I would finish this, and then that, before exiting the room to ask if there was anything I could drink. I kicked myself for not thinking to bring a water bottle. After finishing my goal, I stood up and realized that I had not heard him working outside the room at all. I hadn't heard anything, as a matter of fact. I walked to the door and opened it, to complete darkness. At that instant, I became very nervous and shouted out, "Hey man, I'm making some good progress in here," expecting to hear him respond. He didn't. I looked around, but seriously could not see anything. I looked back into the kitchen, which was bright and lit up with all the lights on and working in the ceiling. I began taking steps out into the dark room, and after taking about 10 steps, I stopped and was about to speak out again. when to my horror, the door slammed shut behind me. I was now engulfed in blinding darkness. I could not see anything, and spun around waving my arms around the room, walking back towards the kitchen door. My steps were small, as I was afraid I was going to run into something. And I did. Waving my hands around in front of me, I hit something. Not a door. I hit someone's face. I gasped and scuttled backwards, not hearing anything. Whoever I had just touched didn't react. I backed up until I hit the back wall, and I realized I must have been close to the entrance door to the building. I turned and felt around for a doorknob. Luck was on my side, as I quickly found the doorknob and pulled it open. It was dark outside at this point, and only a very small amount of moonlight came into the room. Just enough to where I could see the man standing against the kitchen door with a blank expression on his face. I ran out the door and never looked back. That's the last time I used Craigslist to find work. What was that guy doing? What was he going to do? It makes me sick to think about it. Story 2. This happened when I was 18, about 16 years ago. I was still living with my parents in their nice house in suburban Colorado. It was getting late one night, around 11:30 p.m. I was on the phone with my girlfriend, and had decided to go up to my room and switch phones, using the one that was in my room, so I didn't wake my parents that I assumed were now in bed. Voices downstairs echoed upstairs easily, and I had gotten in trouble for that a few times before. I told my girlfriend to hang on, that I was going to put the phone down for a minute while I went upstairs to turn on my phone. I set the phone down on the counter, right next to where it gets hung up on the wall. I quickly walked upstairs and into my bedroom. My room was cold. I had left the window open. I slammed my window shut and picked up the phone next to my bed. All right, babe, one sec. I'm gonna go downstairs real fast and hang up the living room phone. I set the phone down on my bed and went downstairs. I reached the last step, turned left, and stopped. The phone was now hung up on the wall. I stood there, bewildered, for about 30 seconds, a bit creeped out, but mostly confused. Maybe my parents came down and hung it up. No, that wasn't possible. I would have heard them, and I was upstairs for less than a minute. I walked over to the phone and then turned around, looking around the living room and into the kitchen. No signs of my parents. Nobody else was in my house that night. I convinced myself that I must have hung it up before I went upstairs. But wait, that's not possible. I would have hung up on my girlfriend. I walked into the dining room and nobody was there. I walked back upstairs and over to my parents' bedroom. I pressed my ear to the door, and I could hear my dad snoring. I walked into my bedroom and almost had a heart attack when I saw that my bedroom phone was now hung up. I turned around fast to the dark hallway. Nobody. I ran downstairs, and to my horror, I saw the phone in the living room was now gone. I got goosebumps all over my body and my heart was now pounding out of my chest. I ran back upstairs and into my room. I ripped open my closet, but nobody was there. I walked over to my phone and picked it up, and as soon as I did, I heard someone say, "I came in through your bedroom window." I almost dropped the phone out of fright and thought, what the hell, that's impossible. My bedroom is on the second story. I turned around again expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. I turned and opened my window. I looked outside and saw that there was a large extension ladder there, leaning on my house, just below the bottom of my window. I dropped the phone on the ground and ran to my parents' room. I slammed against their door with my fists and yelled, "Open the door. There is somebody in the house." My mom opened up and was confused with a terrified look on her face. I went into their room and my dad was sitting up in bed. I locked their bedroom door and repeated myself, "There is someone in here. They have the phone. They just said something to me." My mom ran to my dad's side of the bed and grabbed his work cell phone that was still in his jeans pocket. She called the police and they were at our front door knocking about 15 minutes later. They searched the house and found no one. They did find the living room phone though. It was laying in the middle of the grass in our backyard. Story 3. Something very creepy happened to me on Christmas. I had celebrated the holiday that morning with my family and went to see my parents. On Christmas night, I had to go into work to finish a proposal I was working on for a new potential client. I obviously didn't want to go into work, but it had to be finished. My work was in a building downtown that is fairly close to a few nightclubs and bars. My office is on the 23rd floor, and in my position, I have an office, but most of this floor is filled up with cubicles in the middle. My office is in the far corner next to my boss's office. So to get to my office, I have to walk by all of the cubicles. I didn't get there late, probably around 8 or 9, but there was nobody else there. This was my second time going in alone, and it was peaceful. If I let my imagination run wild, however, I would get spooked easily. As I walked the path next to the cubicles, I was reminded of what was missing at home while looking at all the Christmas lights strung up decorating people's workspaces. There was no lights on, but the place was lit up enough by all of the Christmas lights. I reached my office and unlocked it. I went inside, but didn't close the door. My computer and desk faced away from my door, so I couldn't see anyone that approached my door on work days through the huge glass window that I had. I found this annoying, as I never knew who was knocking until I got up and opened the door. I sat down and began working as quickly as possible so I could get back home. After a while, I'd say about an hour into it, I heard the main entrance door close. I didn't hear it open, but when it closed it made a noise that was unmistakable. I wasn't spooked at this point, just curious as to who else was unlucky enough to have to come in and finish something. I got up from my desk and walked out onto the floor. I looked around, but didn't see anyone. I said loudly, "Hello." Nobody responded. At this moment I got paranoid and freaked out, because I definitely heard the main entrance door close. Somebody was either here and then left, or was still in here and not responding to me. I was just about to turn around and get back to work, when I saw a head sticking up out of the cubicle on the opposite side of the floor, looking at me. I could see that it was a man, but couldn't make out any details of his face. I thought that he must be messing with me, so I shouted over to him, "What a time to have to come in, huh?" The man didn't move, so I tried again and said, "I can see you, guy." He didn't move. I wasn't sure what to do next, so I felt through my pocket for my keys, and they were there. I started walking down the path towards the entrance door, the whole time watching this guy. I looked over at the entrance door for a second, just 1 second, and then looked back. He was gone. After seeing this, I was convinced that he was moving closer to me, so I ran the rest of the way to the door and went through it. I jogged over to the elevator and hit the button. I turned around quickly, and the door closed as it made the same noise as before. The door thankfully opened immediately, and I went inside and hit the first floor button. The door closed, and I didn't see the guy come out that door. I drove home and told my wife what happened. I had to call my boss and tell him as well, so I had a reason for not finishing my proposal that night. He was understanding, and I went back in 2 days later with everyone else. I never found out who that guy was or what that was all about. Nothing was stolen or tampered with, to my knowledge. Story 4. This happened to me about 15 years ago. I lived near the ocean, and I frequented a certain spot on the beach all the time. It was a lonely spot, and not many people ever really showed up there. This one Saturday afternoon I was laying out in the sand in my spot, relaxing and tanning like I always did. It's not uncommon for me to fall asleep. I did sometimes if the sun wasn't too hot on my skin. This one particular day, I did. I woke up a while later to the sun now setting and realized I had slept for quite a while. I looked to my left and saw a woman sitting near me in the sand, but not on a towel. She was wearing jean shorts and a bathing suit top, and she had really pretty red hair. At first, I didn't really acknowledge her, but after glancing at her a few times, I noticed that she was just staring out into the ocean and didn't turn to look at me or anything for that matter. I felt a bit of curiosity and said hello to her. She said hello right back without turning her head to look at me. Right after that, she sprung to her feet and walked away. I thought that was weird, but didn't think anything really of it. About 30 minutes later, I packed up my stuff and left. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I had a great day relaxing at the beach like I always did. Once I was home, I started making myself dinner. I heard my phone ring and walked over to my purse on the counter and pulled it out. It was my mom, and we started talking about the usual things when I noticed a square folded piece of paper sticking out of my purse in the midst of our conversation. My mom continued talking, and I pulled it out and unfolded it, confused because I was pretty sure I didn't put it there. I literally dropped the phone when I read what was written. It was a note, and it said, "I was going to rob you and stab you in the throat, but you just looked so peaceful." I picked up the phone and told my mom what happened, remembering that girl on the beach. We both nearly passed out. Story 5. I started work as a mailman a few months ago, and just last week, I had an extremely bad experience. There's this one house. Every time I deliver there, I see a person watch me through their window, and I mean every single time. I had always chalked this up to be an elderly person who has nothing better to do, and after a while of it happening, it didn't freak me out as much. One day though, I had to finish delivering mail on another carrier's route that had an emergency and had to stop early. When I was finished with theirs, I had to finish mine own. As I made it to this one particular house where the person watched me every day, I saw that they were not there at the window. This made me happy, but also kind of made me nervous for some reason. I dropped the mail into their slot and continued on. I had 3 more houses before I had to return to my truck to grab all the mail for the next street. When I got back to the truck, I saw a weird-looking lady standing under the streetlight behind it. She looked like she was on drugs. She had stains all over her clothing. When she smiled at me, I noticed that she was missing teeth. She then said hello. I said it back and started gathering the mail for the next street. I couldn't see her as I did this, and I felt like she was walking up behind me. I turned around, and she was indeed closer than she was before. Standing in the street, I asked her if she needed something, and she said no. I then said back, "Okay, well, I'm going to continue on. Have a good day." With all the mail ready to go, I closed the back door, made sure it was all locked up, and started walking. I felt relieved to be walking away from this crazy-looking woman. I delivered to about 6 houses when I noticed the woman standing next to a truck in the shadows. She was following me. I'm sure that she thought that I couldn't see her there. I continued on, and after every other house, I saw that she was keeping up and trying to hide, and this was so creepy. There was nobody else around, and I felt like she would attack me at any moment. I delivered the mail to another house, and sure enough, when I walked back to the sidewalk, I could see her standing in a shadow by a big tree across the street. I decided I could not continue my night like this, and walked over to her. She stiffened up when I approached her, and I said, "Why in the hell are you following me?" She didn't respond, and instead made my heart sink as she let out a noise only a crazy person would make. A noise like she was scared of me, but it sounded really odd. She then ran away. She was definitely on some kind of drugs, and the next day when I came to that house where I would always see somebody there watching me through the window, she was there, and I know that it was her. Story 6. The following story happened when I was 16, and still to this day, I reflect on it from time to time. A bit of background. I live in Australia, and live reasonably close to a Royal National Park where this story takes place. If you aren't familiar with the park, it is a large area over 100 kilometers in space with winding roads and nothing but brushland that are quite fun to drive through. On a night like any other, I was doing just that. I was a passenger in my friend Ash's car, and my brother Lucas was with us. It was approximately 1 a.m., and we were driving deeper into the park as we had done hundreds of times before. As we came quickly around a bend in the route, we were face to face with a girl standing at the edge of the road, close to one of those barriers, as we must be near a cliff. She looked to be in her teens. Her age I couldn't be 100% sure. Though this sounds cliché, I swear she was wearing some kind of white dress, and was pale-faced. I am an avid horror movie fan, so I understand how this all sounds. Her immediate appearance was what was concerning to us. We had stopped virtually in the middle of the road, and the car's headlights were shining directly on her. We became uneasy when the girl did not blink, flinch, or move a muscle, despite facing us directly. I remember wondering why she would be out here standing in the pitch-black night. I can't remember if my brother or our friend suggested it, but someone said, "Should we go see if she needs help?" In that moment, so many questions were racing through my mind. I think I was the first to speak and said no, firmly. As much as I wanted to help someone, I reasoned with the boy, saying that if she was in trouble and needed help, she would have indicated it by now. I also suggested that it could be some kind of trap, used to distract us, and someone could be nearby to attack us if we aided her. After what felt like hours, though really, it was only a minute, we got the hell out of there. We had to drive past her to continue our route, and couldn't do a U-turn or a 3-point turn, because the road was too narrow. As we drove past her, I was in the back seat and turned my head to watch her. I still get chills when I think about this, but that girl's head turned slowly in sync with the car's movements and watched us drive away. I kept my eyes on her, and still she did not blink or move as the light around her started to dim until she was in the darkness once again, and I could no longer see her face. Oddly enough, the three of us didn't mention it the next day, or for a very long time. At least I don't remember having a conversation about it with Lucas. It was only a few years later when I had started to question if I had dreamed it when I asked my brother and our friend if they remembered that night. To my horror, and somewhat relief, they did. They recalled the details as I had recalled them, so I knew it was real. Over the years, I have wondered what became of her. I regret not going to the police, and you may ask why I would even go to the police if she had done nothing wrong. Truth be told, there are no residents that deep in the park, and she was a good hour's walk or so from the nearest highway. I have gone back to the park several times since, specifically to try to find the girl or see if there would be a common occurrence. I have researched online for any clues as to who she might have been. On one drive, when I was searching, I said to a friend of mine, Nick, who was happy to come along, that there could be bodies in the brush and no one would know. A week after I said this, the dead body of a man was found a few feet away from the road in the brush by a motorist who had stopped to relieve himself. It was in the news, and it makes me wonder how many people are out there in that park. But most of all, who was that girl that we saw that night? Story 7. I was 10 years old and being wheeled into the hospital late at night. Once I was inside, I remember the doctor telling my parents that I had pneumonia, and my mom started to cry. Those are the only things I remember about my visit up until I was left alone on the first night. I have no idea what time it was when this occurred, but probably very late. Everyone else in the rooms around me were sleeping, and so was I, until I heard something. I was facing the center of the room when I opened my eyes. I heard someone's shoes squeaking on the floor outside my hospital room. I turned over and saw a nurse walk by, but she had walked out of my vision past my window before I could see her face. About 2 seconds passed, and then I saw her walk by again. This is when my heart stopped beating because of what exactly I saw. She was walking by at a very fast pace and was looking at me through the window in an exaggerated stare, meaning she was walking by, but her head turned completely to the right side as she did, not able to see in front of her as she walked, and just staring at me. Very quickly she was out of sight again, and then suddenly she started walking by again in the opposite direction. She was walking back and forth in front of my window. This time her head turned completely to the left, again, staring into my eyes. She had brown hair that was messy, and she looked insane. On this pass, I noticed that her eyes were opened very wide. At this point I thought my heart would explode because of how it was beating and how scared I was. Nobody else was in sight. When she walked out of my vision, 2 seconds later, she was walking by again, every time her head turned to the side looking at me. I remember thinking, even at 10 years old, that something about her was very wrong. I didn't move a muscle and could do nothing except just watch this incredibly scary woman walk back and forth in front of my window. One of the times she walked by, she was smiling, a huge sickening smile that made tears well up in my eyes. Every time she walked by, she could not see what was in front of her, because the only thing she wanted to see was me, in my bed, through my window. It seemed like several minutes had passed until finally she did not walk by again. She simply walked by one last time and then was gone. I sat there in my bed and peered out my window, expecting her to walk by again at any moment, but she didn't. I must have stared out my window for the better part of an hour before my eyes got so heavy that I fell asleep. The next morning I awoke with my dad sitting in my chair next to my bed, reading a book. He smiled when he saw that I was awake, and I told him what I saw before I fell asleep that night. He didn't seem to be scared, or even very alarmed. He asked me if I was sure that it wasn't a dream. I was 100% sure then, and I am 100% sure now. The woman was real, and it happened. She was wearing the same thing as every other nurse that I saw. I was in that hospital for 3 days, and didn't see her again. Story 8. This happened 2 years ago on our anniversary. My wife and I were celebrating 3 years married, and we decided to both take a day off work and go for a drive down to the beach. It was a bit of a drive, about 3 hours one way. The drive was amazing. We had fantastic conversation and enjoyed all the sights on the way out there. When we arrived, there was only a few hours left of daytime left, but we didn't mind. We kind of liked the idea of walking along the sand at night to look at the stars and listen to the ocean peacefully, without the usual noise that comes with visiting the beach. We ate dinner at a nice steakhouse right on the water, and when we finished, we decided it was time to hit the beach, finally. From the restaurant, we walked to our car, which was parked in the lot right next to the beach entrance. My wife grabbed a sweater and a blanket, while I grabbed a six-pack and a small cooler that I had brought. We headed towards the sand and went through a very old wooden fence with an opening cut out. We walked out towards the water and marveled at the sight of it, and the moon lighting our way beautifully. We stopped and chose a nice spot, about 30 yards away from the waves crashing against the sand, and about 70 yards, I'd say, from the wooden fence, leading back to our car. We unfolded the blanket and sat down on top of it. After a few minutes of talking, kissing, and drinking, we laid down. We were truly amazed by all the stars in the sky, and it was a gorgeous sight. I'd say about 15 minutes later I felt a presence. I was still watching the stars, but I felt like there was somebody watching us. I sat up and noticed that my wife had drifted off to sleep. I looked around the beach and saw nothing. Complete serenity. Then I turned completely around. About 15 feet away was a man sitting behind us in the sand. This caught me completely off guard and scared the hell out of me, mainly because he didn't speak when he noticed that I had seen him. He sat in the sand very close to us with a giant smile on his face. A giant, extremely creepy smile. I was in shock to see this, and at first, was not even able to speak. I glanced at my wife, who was completely asleep, and at that moment, I'm not sure why, but I felt like our lives were in very real danger. I looked up and the man reacted. His smile disappeared and turned into an angry look. He then pulled out a knife from behind him. I shook my wife awake. My wife woke up immediately and spun around to see what I was looking at. At that moment, he smiled at her, and my wife gasped when she saw that he had a knife. When she did this, he stood up and then took a step towards us. That's when I got to my feet and said, "What do you want? You can have our phones and our keys, but I don't have any cash." The man looked completely crazy, which was terrifying. He wore a brown suit, all ripped up. It looked like it came out of a trash can. He was bald and he looked homeless. He did not respond to me. After about 15 seconds of unnerving silence, he did something. He ran up to us very quickly, and my wife screamed. He stopped before he stepped foot onto our blanket, and once again, his smile turned into a crazy and angry-looking frown. I spoke one last time. "Dude, you can have everything, just be cool. You can have my beer." My voice was cracking. I was petrified. I tried to humanize this guy and make him feel almost welcome to our stuff, like his knife wasn't a big deal. He then spoke to us. He said in a normal and sane voice, "I don't drink." Then he turned around and started walking away from us. Relief hit me like a ton of bricks. He continued walking away, and then turned around again. He didn't look at us, but instead looked up at the sky. Then he turned around again and made his way through the fence and disappeared into the town. My wife started tearing up, and I said, "Let's go." We very quickly grabbed our belongings and started walking towards our car. When we got to our car, we saw people outside the restaurant talking and laughing. They had no idea what we just experienced. We got inside the car and drove away. We were pretty much silent on the way back home. My wife just hung her head out the window. We haven't gone back to that town since. Story 9. I'm in my 30s, and I am about to tell you of the scariest night of my life. I had just gotten home from work at around 6 p.m. My wife and daughter had decided to visit my wife's parents that evening, and left my young son and myself alone. It was a long, tough day at work, and I found myself drifting off while reading on my bed. Meanwhile, my son was watching TV in his room. His door was shut. I drifted off into full-on slumber when something awoke me. Not a sound or anything. Just a sickening feeling of dread. I got up out of bed and saw that my dog was laying on the ground next to the bed, as she was when I laid down a little over 2 hours ago. It was around 8:30 at this time now, and I realized my wife and daughter were still gone. I walked into the living room and found my house to be completely dark. I walked to my son's bedroom and opened the door. Extreme uneasiness came over me as I opened his door to darkness, and he was no longer there. I immediately did an about-face and stomped down the hall, yelling his name. No response. I stood in the pitch-black kitchen for a moment, trying to comprehend what was happening and where my son could be. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed my wife. "Hello? Baby, is John with you? Did you guys come home?" I felt my heart sink into my stomach when she said a firm and confused, "No." She then asked, "What do you mean? Where is he?" I stood in the darkness and felt like I was going to explode with pure fear. "He's not in the house." "I'm calling Brandon's house. He's probably..." My wife cut me off in a bold tone. "What do you mean?" "Okay, call his house." I told her that I would call her right back. I called Brandon's house phone, and his mother answered after 3 rings. "Hi, Teresa. Is John over there?" She sounded confused and replied, "Yes." "You didn't know he came over?" The amount of relief I felt, I cannot tell you. I told Brandon's mother to send John home immediately, that he was in big trouble. They only lived 6 houses down from us, on the same street, but my son was 9 years old. I should have called the police that night, and I will tell you why. My wife got home pretty quick after that, with my daughter. John walked in the door like nothing was wrong. "What the hell do you think you're doing leaving the house without my permission?" He looked at me like I was insane. "Dad, you said I could go. I asked you." I glared at him with an equally puzzled look on my face. "When?" "No, I did not." "When you were outside my bedroom door playing." My look of confusion turned into sheer terror. "What are you talking about?" I fell asleep on my bed. "I was never playing outside your door." My son responded, "You knocked and I said come in, and you were laughing. You were playing. I asked if I could go to Brandon's and you said yes." At this point I was a mixture of extreme confusion and fear. "John, I've been asleep. I never said you could go. I was never playing outside your door. Fast forward a bit now. I had chalked this up to a misunderstanding. My son was either lying to me, or was hearing things, or I had done these things and had no memory of it somehow, because of how tired I was perhaps. I really didn't know. That night we were all laying in bed, and I was laying there in the darkness, my wife asleep. We had a back door connected to our master bedroom. The back door had a huge glass window on it, almost the full length of the door, and I could see the entire backyard. It was a normal thing for me to look out there periodically throughout the night, because it was right in my line of sight when I would lay on my right side. While laying there, trying to make sense of the earlier incident, I felt the blood in my veins turn from a warm flow to an icy cold current. There was a man, crouched down in my backyard, underneath my trampoline. I lay there frozen with fear, probably for about 2 or 3 minutes. The man did not move. I don't think he could see that I was looking at him. Suddenly the man forced me to react. He moved quickly out from underneath the trampoline and towards my daughter's bedroom window, which was just out of my view. Just as quickly as that happened, I heard my daughter scream. No exaggeration, I was out of that bed and in her room in less than 5 seconds. In the midst of her scream, my son opened his door as I flew by, my wife right behind me. I switched on her light to see her sitting up in bed screaming, pointing at her bedroom window, glaring at the maniac with his palms pressed against her glass, laughing hysterically. I gasped, grabbed my daughter, and all of us ran into the kitchen, where I grabbed the house phone off the wall and dropped it due to the speed that I had tried to do so. I picked it up off the ground and very shakily dialed 911. The man's laugh had ceased and none of us moved. My wife and I clutched kitchen knives as the 4 of us crouched in the dark and waited for the police to come. To my surprise, they showed up very quickly and knocked on the front door. I let them in and told them what had happened. They walked through the whole house and then into the backyard. They found nothing. After talking with the cops for a while and puzzling all the pieces together, I concluded that the man had been in my house earlier that evening while I slept and played a little game with my son. To this day, I have no idea why this happened, who this man was, or what happened to him. But none of us ever saw him again. He was never caught. I bought a gun very shortly after this incident, and I pray that I never see this man around my family again, or I will kill him. Story 10. So I have a very creepy story to share. This happened to me when I was 20 years old, and my girlfriend and I were staying at a cabin that my parents owned in Reno. They weren't using it at the time, so my girlfriend and I invited 2 of our friends to come along with us. Once we were settled in, we had an amazing time. We sat in the hot tub on the balcony, drank like fish and smoked. We had been there for 2 days, and the creepiest thing happened on our second night there. 3 days before Christmas, we were all sitting in the hot tub relaxing when the lights inside the cabin went out. We didn't assume it was a power outage, as the lights on the back patio were still on. Only the lights inside the cabin suddenly turned off. I got out of the hot tub and so did my buddy John. We headed back inside to see what was going on, but by this point we had been drinking quite a bit, and honestly it was kind of exciting. As we opened the sliding glass door, John whispered to me that he was scared. We both laughed. We were trying to act tough and look fearless in front of the girls. As we walked inside into the kitchen area, we didn't see or hear anything, so we then both walked upstairs. When we got there, we made our way into the master bedroom, and that's when I heard my girlfriend scream. There's somebody in there. John and I froze and real terror set in. We slowly walked to the window and looked down at the girls, who were now standing up in the hot tub. In a quiet voice, I shouted down, "Not funny." They looked up at us and freaked out. "We're not playing. We saw somebody in there." John and I turned around and walked out of the room extremely slowly, scared to death. We started walking down the stairs, and when we got to the bottom, we looked around and saw nothing. We went back onto the back patio. John suggested that we circle around to the front of the cabin and just leave. We all agreed and started walking to the side of the cabin. As we were walking by one of the windows, all of us at the same time jumped back when we saw someone run down the stairs and out the back door we had just come from. We all sprinted to the front of the cabin, not looking back, and luckily John had grabbed his car keys and cell phone when we went inside to look around. We backed up down the driveway, which was steep as hell. It was very cold out and snowing, and was also completely pitch black around us. We backed up down the driveway to the road. John called the police, and they met us outside the cabin about 30 minutes later. They helped us check the place out, but nobody was there, and the cops eventually left. We were all so damn scared that we all ended up packing up our things and drove home. I haven't stayed at that cabin since, but my parents have quite a few times, and they've told me over the years that they have never had a similar experience. Story 11. This happened to my sister 2 years ago on Halloween. She was home alone. Our parents were at my uncle's house, and I was out with some friends. She said that she was watching Hocus Pocus when around midnight she heard the doorbell ring. She thought to herself it was a bit odd, as she hadn't heard anyone at the door for at least 2 hours now. She assumed that all the trick-or-treaters were done for the night. She had a bowl of candy on the sofa next to her, and saw that there were a few Milky Ways and Butterfingers left. So she got up, grabbed the bowl, and went and opened the front door. She said that a little boy, probably no more than 11 or 12, was standing there with a Leatherface costume on, mask and all. She said to the boy, "It's so late. Your parents are okay with you trick-or-treating right now?" Now this is where things get weird. She said that the boy did not respond, and just stood there like a statue. She could see his eyes under his mask. He was just standing still, and staring at her. She gave out a fake laugh, and held out the bowl of candy for the boy. The boy did not reach for it, and that's when she realized that he didn't even have a bag or a bucket. She then said to him, "What are you doing? Where is your bucket?" The boy again ignored her. She had had enough by this point, and closed the door. After that, she told me she looked through the peephole in the door, and saw that the boy was still standing there. Then, like something straight out of a nightmare, the boy began rapidly shaking his head from left to right, like he would when you're trying to say no. But then he suddenly stopped, and just stood there again. My sister continued watching through the peephole, and says that the boy stood on our porch for at least 10 minutes, not moving or saying anything, and then he suddenly ran off our porch and disappeared out of sight. Story 12. I left work one night later than usual. When I was driving home, I ran into some construction that was going on, and was forced to take a detour. I turned right onto a street that I rarely ever drove on, and haven't been down in years. The street took me into a downtown area of my city, which wasn't a very nice place to be. Crime happened there all the time, and it made me nervous, especially since it was dark, and there were no other vehicles around. I made a stop at a stop sign, and apparently made a wrong turn, because when I looked around, I noticed that all the detour signs were gone. I pulled my phone out of my jacket that was sitting on the passenger seat, in order to use the GPS so I didn't get lost. As I was navigating my phone, I heard a noise outside of my car. I looked up from my phone to see what it was. When I did, I spotted a woman about 30 yards from my car. She was in the parking lot of a convenience store that was now closed. She was standing off by the corner of the store, where it was much darker. Right after I saw her, I noticed that she looked scared, and almost immediately, I saw a man reach out from the side of the building she was standing next to, grab her by the arm, and pull her out of sight. This scared me to death, and I wasn't sure what to do. My first thought was that someone may have been trying to rob her. I was about to call 911 when I realized that he might be trying to do something even worse. Now I'm not the toughest guy in the world, and I've only been in a couple of fights in my life, but I'll be damned if this woman was going to be raped or killed while I was around. So I took in a deep breath, opened my car door, and after I did, I heard the woman again. She sounded like she was half screaming, half calling for help. Her voice sounded muffled, like the man was trying to cover her mouth. I walked around to the back of my car and started towards where she had disappeared out of sight. I walked fast and tried to be as quiet as possible. Her sounds were abruptly cut off, and that's when I got scared. Scared of what I might have seen. Scared of what I might have had to do. I reached the corner of the store and very slowly looked down into the dark side of the building. At first I saw nothing, and so I moved closer. And that's when I saw them. I saw them both, standing in the darkness, side by side, like statues. He wasn't touching her. She wasn't crying or screaming. They weren't fighting. They just stood there. I realized quickly what was happening now. I immediately turned around and started to sprint back towards my car. As my feet hit the ground, I could hear that they were chasing me. I got to my car and threw the door open, immediately locking it behind me. Right after I did, they were both attempting to open the doors from both sides. I started up my car again and stomped the pedal to the floor. I was so shaken over what had just happened that I ran 2 stop signs on my way back home. I never saw their faces up close, and you can bet your ass that I have never been down that street since. Story 13. I have a story to tell you all. This happened in my house when I was about 11 years old. This one day, I believe I was playing video games when I heard a knock at the door. My parents were in their room talking, and I ran to the door and looked through the window next to it to see who it was. It was a police officer. I thought this was kind of cool, not realizing something could be wrong, and I opened it. We had a metal screen that was locked. The police officer first said, "Hi there, are your parents home?" I told him yes, and asked if he'd like me to go get them. He responded with, "Are you sure? There aren't any cars in the driveway or out front. Can you open the screen so I can talk to you?" I said back, "Yeah, they're here. Their cars are parked in the driveway." 1 second. I then yelled out, "Dad." My dad replied, "Yeah." I walked over to their bedroom door and told them the policeman was at the door. My dad looked concerned and got up. He walked over to the front door, and the police officer was now gone. My dad looked at me confused and said, "A cop was at the door." He then unlocked the screen and walked outside. I stayed in the house, and my dad walked in a few seconds later. What did he say? Are you sure it was a cop? I replied, yeah. He was wearing the outfit. He asked if you and Mom were here. My dad shrugged and said, weird. He didn't say anything else. Did he say something was wrong? I shook my head no. My dad shrugged and walked back to his room while I went to the couch and resumed my video games. A few days later, another police officer came to our house. This time, my dad answered the door. The cop said to my dad, hello, sir. Sorry to bother you, but we've had some calls from people on the street claiming a man came to the door dressed as a police officer. Did he by any chance come by here? My dad told them what happened a few days previous, when the cops hit my dad with a bombshell. He said the man was not a cop at all, but a man pretending to be one, trying to locate children who were home alone. Story 14. A few winters ago, I got a job as a security guard. My responsibilities were to guard the construction site of a 3-story industrial building that was in development. This was a super sweet job. All I had to do was to be at the construction site between the hours of 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. I could sit in my truck the entire time, except for 2 different times I was instructed to patrol the site. What I would do is get out of my truck and walk the perimeter of the site, then go inside and shine my flashlight around. This obviously wasn't a hard task, but it was a bit creepy. It was pitch black around this site at night, and there were no working lights anywhere. Every time I patrolled, I was a bit creeped out, except for one evening, where the creepiness turned into straight-up terror. The night was going by normally. I was watching YouTube videos and listening to music in my truck. The clock hit 1 a.m., and I was due to complete my second patrol to the site. The first patrol went by completely normal, and I had no reason to expect any different this time around. So I jumped out of the truck and started down the path that led around the site. I was shining my flashlight in front of me the whole time, and saw nothing out of the ordinary. This truck around the site took the most time out of the patrol, and I'd say about 15 minutes after I began, I had circled all the way around and was back at my truck. At this time, I headed inside the building. My truck was parked in the front of this building, and so I entered at the front door. This building was still being framed, and there were no doors installed anywhere, including the ones that led to the exterior. And that's the reason I was here, to make sure nobody just walked inside and stole any construction equipment or vandalized any part of it. As I walked inside, I heard something upstairs. It sounded like a shovel or something had fallen onto the floor, and so I hesitantly started up the stairs to investigate. As I walked up the stairs, shining my flashlight in front of me, I was spooked. What would I do if there was somebody up here messing around? I don't have a gun or anything, just some pepper spray that the owners gave me. I reached the top of the stairs and the second floor. I shined my flashlight around and didn't see anything suspicious. I walked around and eventually reached the front of the building, and that's when I looked down to my truck, through the recently installed window there. There was somebody sitting in my truck. I noticed quickly that it was a man with a shaved head. He was sitting on the driver's side seat, with his legs still hanging out of the truck, facing me. The man had his arms crossed, and he was wearing all black. I was just about to turn around and head back down to confront him, when he suddenly looked up at me and waved. At that moment, I turned around and ran back to the stairs. I walked down them quickly and ran out of the building. I ran over to my truck, and the guy was no longer there. I got very nervous at this point and looked around with my flashlight. I saw nothing around and decided to call my boss and let him know that there was a man here. As the phone was ringing, I searched my truck and saw that nothing was missing and everything was where I left it. My boss didn't answer, so I left a very short message stating, "It's 11:22 am, and there's someone messing around at this site. I have not located them yet." I shined my light around like a madman, searching for this potentially dangerous person, and thought it would be a better idea to get into my truck and drive slowly around the site. This didn't take long, and I didn't see anyone. I circled back to the front and parked my truck in the exact same spot I was in before. I put the truck in park and called my boss again. I got no answer. I got out of the truck again and stood next to my driver's side door, and again shining the light around. I didn't see the guy. Then I shined the light up to the window I had first noticed him at, and saw him standing in the same spot I was at, looking down at me. I realized my job was to stop people from messing around at this site. But this creeped me out so damn much that I got into my truck and just waited until my boss eventually came back. He called the police, I guess, because an officer showed up there about a half an hour later. He went inside the building and looked around, but never saw the guy. I didn't see him again that night, or any other night I was there. I have no idea why he was there. Story 15. This happened when I was in college, 4 years ago. I went to a university that was very close to an ocean on the East Coast. I made friends with some people on the weekend, and one guy in the group of people I met invited us to go out on his boat with him. He described his boat to a bunch of people, and was very proud to have it. It sounded like an expensive sailboat by the way he described it. Not really familiar with boats, and hadn't ever really been on one other than a cruise ship when I was like 11. This guy said his parents bought one for him, and that made sense because he was known to be a spoiled kid. He was nice enough, though, and the idea of cruising around some Saturday afternoon and drinking some beers sounded appealing. After that conversation, I saw him around in school, but didn't really talk to him much. Until one day he approached me in the library and asked if I still wanted to go sailing. I said sure, that sounded awesome, and he told me the following day he was going out on the water, and it would be a perfect opportunity for me to join him. After a lengthy conversation about how sailing works, and him assuring me it was safe, and he had all the proper training, I told him I'd meet him at the docks the next morning. That night, my roommate asked me what I was doing for the weekend, and I told him that I made plans to go out sailing. He freaked out on me, and told me he really wished he could go, and that I was sure that the other guy would be cool with it. The next morning my roommate and I grabbed some coffee, and grabbed some beer to bring along with us on our voyage. We ate some breakfast, and then we headed over to the docks to meet the guy. We were pretty excited, and when we got there, we followed the direction he gave me, and found his boat. It was a huge orange and white sailboat. We stood on the dock next to the boat looking at it, when the guy popped his head up from somewhere, and immediately showed a look of concern on his face. He jumped off the side of the boat, onto the dock next to us. He looked at my roommate, and then myself, and asked, "Who is this?" I told him he was my roommate. He was cool, and that he had asked if he could come along. I told him I didn't think he would mind. The guy looked very annoyed, and it was awkward as hell for a few moments. The guy kept looking back and forth of the boat and then us. He took his hat off and rubbed his head like he was really stretched out. Eventually he sighed and said it was fine. I'll fast forward now to the part of the story that was scary as hell. A few hours later, we were on the boat, drinking and having fun. The water was pretty smooth sailing, and the sun was shining bright on us. The guy acted a bit off the whole time, and I figured it was because I brought my roommate. After drinking 3 or 4 beers, I felt the courage to ask the guy what was wrong, and if he was still pissed I brought my roommate. He responded with something along the lines of, "It just kind of ruined my plans." My roommate chimed in with a smile on his face and asked the guy. I could tell my roommate thought it was funny because it sounded like the guy wanted to be alone with me. The guy looked at him and said, "This took me off guard completely, and I felt fear and unbelievable relief hit me at the same time." My roommate and this guy started cracking up, and my roommate brushed it off as a joke. I honestly didn't know what to think. Was this guy serious? Did I avoid being killed by this asshole? Is his sense of humor just that weird? I believe I got my answer when I went below the deck an hour later to grab another beer from the fridge. Next to his fridge was a brown swinging door that led to a small private bedroom quarters. I was feeling the beer pretty good by this point, and without thinking, pushed the door open. Laying on the foot of the bed was a big-ass cinder block, some yellow rope, tape, and what looked like a recorder of some sort. After seeing that, I felt sick to my stomach and wanted off that boat as soon as possible. I wanted to go back up and confront the guy, but decided against it because of what he might have been on. Who knows what he was capable of? Could be on some serious drugs, or even worse. What seemed like hours and hours more of being with this guy, we finally made it back to the dock. We said our goodbyes, and on the way back to my room, I told my roommate about what I had seen. He couldn't believe it. I'm pretty damn sure that my roommate saved my life that day by wanting to go with me. And I kid you not, I never saw that guy again on campus. What he had planned, I don't know, and I really don't want to think about it. Story 16. I spent the night at my girlfriend's house one night and had to leave really early in the morning to go to work. So early, it was still dark outside when I left, and would be for a few more hours. She lived in a rural town about 60 miles from my house and work. And when I got in my car and started driving, there weren't the usual street lights lighting the roads to guide me. The only light that came was from my headlights. About 10 miles into my drive, my car started to slow down and eventually came to a stop. I first checked my gas, and it was almost full. I'm not a very car trouble savvy guy, so I dug my phone out of my pocket and swiped the screen open. And nothing happened. I realized that my phone was dead. Just my luck. And immediately after that, I came to the realization that I had forgotten to plug it in last night before we went to sleep. So here I was, stuck in my car on the side of a rural street, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I started to think of things to do. I could start walking. No, that's a horrible idea. It was dark as hell out there, and I wouldn't be able to see anything while walking. And on top of that, somebody could hit me. I concluded that the only thing I could do was sit in my car and wait for daylight, which is a very stressful and scary thing to have to come to terms with. It was winter, and I started getting cold. I tried starting my car over and over to no avail. I gave up and crossed my arms. I sat in the dark car on the dark street for about 10 minutes just looking into the darkness in front of me before I squinted my eyes and noticed somebody walking towards my car, directly in front of me. They were about 30 yards away. The only thing I could see was the outline of their body. They stopped right after I noticed them. I got really scared and just gazed at his outline for the longest time. In a sudden movement, they started walking again, but fast. In a few seconds, they reached my driver's side door and tried to open it. Did they think the car was empty? Holy hell, did they see me in here? I leaned away from the car door and window and onto the center console. After failing to open my locked door, they stood there for a moment and then very suddenly turned and walked away in the direction they came from. I was so confused and creeped out by this. Why would they walk back the way they came? I don't get it. I sat there in the dark wondering what was happening when all of a sudden I saw two headlights come out in front of me. The car was parked on the same side of the road as mine, but facing me. Had the person stopped when they saw my car? What would they do next? How did I not see them stop there? After a few moments, they started their engine and turned their car around, driving off down the road. A few hours later, the sun was rising and a truck stopped next to me to ask if I was having trouble. I'm asked to use their cell phone, and with it, I called my girlfriend, who picked me up soon after. Story 17. Okay, so first of all, I don't want this to seem like a story in search for sympathy, but more of a way to finally accept it and move on and hopefully help other girls or boys realize these red flags in a relationship that I so blindly overlooked. I'm sorry if this story is a little long, but bear with me. It's worth the listen. Background information. I'm 18 years old. I met this boy. We'll call him Trent. Trent and I met through a mutual friendship group of friends that I was very close with for many years. We started hanging out as a group to smoke with our friends. He was the loveliest boy with such kind eyes and the most adorable smile. I was infatuated. Trent had a past before I knew him, troubles with past girlfriends, and a bit known for a bad temper. But I ignored the warning signs from multiple people and even an ex of his, assuming the classic lie, he'll never hurt me though. We started dating late March last year, 21 to be exact. He asked me out on a night when we had taken a lot of Xanax for fun with his friends and was expressing to me and his friends within 2 months of knowing him how he was completely head over heels for me, and that made me fall deeper and deeper. Everything was so exciting and new, and he gave me butterflies. Side note to this, I had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and bipolar II disorder, which just adds to the fun of my life. All was good until about 4 months of being together. I was at home one night, planning to push through it and go out for some drinks with him and some friends, but changed my mind as I physically could not leave my bed. That night he disappeared. His phone was off for hours and worried me sick. In the morning I wake up to a message saying his phone had gotten broken when he got pushed into a pool and had to leave it to sit and rise overnight. He came over to my house that day and took care of me while I was sick. 2 months go by, and I found out 3 days before my birthday that on that exact night he had cheated on me after he enticed his ex-girlfriend to go over to his house, saying that he was going to take his own life because we had a fight and I wouldn't speak to him anymore. They had sex that night, and when I found out it broke me. My heart ached and raced. It pounded in my chest, and I left his house in tears, with him chasing me up the street. I hid in a driveway and turned off my tracking location that he set up on my phone and caught the first bus that I saw after hiding and watching him pace around the streets, shirtless and shoeless while searching for me. An hour later I decided to answer his call. Call number 23 or so, and tell him to leave me alone. It was then that he screamed and cried and begged that I didn't give in, and so ended the call. 2 minutes later he called me, saying he needed to go to the hospital, as he shattered his hand while punching a hole in a glass mirror behind his door. After a few weeks of my heart longing for him and him begging for me, I felt like he must have really loved me to do all of this. The stupidest mistake I've ever made. His behavior continued throughout our 6-month relationship. If I didn't answer a phone call, I would receive 10 within 5 minutes, and 10 messages of how I was a dog. Even if I had just left my phone in a room for 20 minutes while I had dinner, he demanded to see me all the time, and begged to be by my side every minute. I saw all of this as an expression of his love to me. Our relationship was spent majorly smoking weed daily, and I mean all day. If he wasn't stoned, all hell would break loose until it could get high again. I spent hundreds of dollars buying weed to help him feel better when we would argue in the car, or he would be in a bad mood. He had made threats to me and my friends in the past about killing all of the dogs. My friends did not see it the way I did, and eventually we had fallen out, and he assured me that they weren't my true friends. He was the only real person I had in my life who truly cared and loved me, and I believed it. My confidence diminished. My happiness was released in the smallest doses. I began to stop recognizing the girl who I was, and couldn't remember how it felt to have genuine happiness. Only when he was in a good mood and wanted to be intimate and cuddly, that's when I felt good. On our 6 months, we had a lovely dinner in the city at a super expensive restaurant. After our meal and a few drinks, he told me to go wait around the corner for him while he paid, and I called a cab. I found out when he walked out that he had not paid, and we made a run for it. Later that night we went to visit our 2 best friends who were also a couple and were part of our smoking squad, as we like to call ourselves. We decided to go for a little drive around the corner and smoke a little bit before going home. It was while we were chopping up that me and my friend Bella were whispering in the back. Trent couldn't quite understand what we were talking about and demanded to know what we were saying. As a joke, Bella sarcastically replied that I was talking about another boy. This is when he ran over to the side of the car. As he did this, I pulled the lock on her door and he punched a hole straight through her window, leaving shatters of glass flying all over him. The police came for a noise complaint, and after coming up with an excuse, I was left to walk my boyfriend home while he was sobbing and apologizing. Eventually we were escorted home in the police car. We broke up that weekend after encounters of him smashing his head into a wall, swiping a photo frame off the table and slicing his hand, punching a hole in my brother's car windscreen, and grabbed my shirt while I was driving. I had officially been scared and saw for the first time that he might really be dangerous. I told him I could not be with him after the damage to my brother's car. My family would never look at him the same and would ban me from seeing him. The very next morning he made me pick him up at 8 a.m. and he took the car to get the window fixed so I wouldn't leave him. In short words, I didn't forgive him. A week later, a week of hundreds of missed calls, thousands of messages, off every single social media possible, he began sending me photos of bottles and Xanax that he was buying, telling me that he was going to beat them all and it was going to be all my fault. My heart dropped, and I answered his call and begged him not to be so silly. I told him I would go and see him that afternoon to make sure he was okay and not to get back together. He seemed happy with that and hung up the phone. That day, I was with a couple girlfriends at a pool party with some of my old friends that he didn't particularly like. After being there for maybe an hour or so, I bet you can guess who just lets themselves in and walks straight inside, demanding to everyone that I leave right now. I refused, and I was petrified. His eyes, I knew that look. The way his green eyes turned almost black when he was in a rage. I continued to refuse and told him I would come outside and talk to him if he let me bring one of the boys outside to make sure I was okay. He didn't take that one bit and decided to leave. Okay, that was a relief for me. Less than 20 seconds later, we hear smashing in the side street. The whole house ran outside to investigate and watch as Trent ran back to his car and sped off after ripping off the windshield wipers of another one of my best friend's cars and shattering each window. At this point, we were all so worried and angry and confused, so we decided that we should drop the damaged car to my house so it was off the streets and somewhere safe. However, my car was parked a few streets over. I got into the car and began driving when I was rammed into an intersection. My car was spinning and I quickly gained control only to realize that he was chasing me in his own car. We zoomed through the traffic, through red lights, intersections, squeezing through almost impossible car spaces, like in a movie. I almost hit 3 pedestrians and God knows how many cars. He chased me down the streets, continuously ramming me, then slowing down and speeding up just to ram me again. Glancing back in my rearview mirror, I saw him laughing and taunting me. Those eyes I will never forget. Immediately when I noticed him chasing me, I called 000. It's Australia's 911, and tried frantically explaining to the operator where I was and what was happening whilst being rammed and trying to dodge cars and people and sidewalks, poles and street signs. I thought I would throw him off and turn into a car park that was right there, but he was too quick and sped in front of my car, locking me in while he blocked the exit with his car. The door opened and he stepped outside, throwing himself at the windows and trying to rip open the doors. I screamed into the phone and begged for help, but they just could not seem to find me. Eventually, I decided that the windows were going to give out soon and I needed to get away. So I drove up the gutter, ripping off half of the front bumper of the car and sped all the way back up the street. I thought I got away when I saw he was struggling to get back into his car, but that relief shattered when I saw his white car right behind me again, ramming and stopping while he left. I drove through 3 suburbs and drove straight to my dad's house. I honked the horn like a crazy person, but his car was quick to catch up and I could not bear the thought of putting any one of my family members at risk of this maniac, so I kept going, hoping that he wasn't quick enough to swipe my car off the cliff edge that runs alongside my street. I continued driving over the top of all of the roundabouts, but I didn't care. My mom lives around the corner from my dad's and I started to head there, but as I reached the street, I remembered my 5-year-old sister and my mom and I couldn't dare putting them at risk, so I kept on driving around corners, swiping into cars and trying to find every main road possible, begging for help to the operator. I shouted at them just to please find me. I continued to fly down the street at 120 miles per hour. I'm an 18-year-old girl. I've never driven so fast or so chaotically. After about 10 minutes of what seemed like an hour, I reached yet another main road and repeated my location to the operator, all the while being rammed and tormented. He sped up in the lane next to me on the opposite side of the road and swerved his car into the front of mine in an attempt to lock me in so he could try to rip me from the car. My immediate reaction was the reverse. I put the car into reverse and put the accelerator flat to the floor. It only took seconds for him to get back into his car and begin driving at me, head on. The only thing I could do was drive forwards at him. This is the part where everything went in slow motion. I saw him coming at me. We were driving at each other at about 40 miles per hour, and my only options were to either crash into a parked car next to me, crash head-on into Trent, or crash into a telegraph pole on the other side of the road. The only thing running through my mind was which way would be the quickest and least painful way to die. So I chose the pole, and I took a hard right turn as I missed the front of it by being saved by the gutter, saving my life by mere inches. This really made him mad, and he turned the car back around again and T-boned the driver's side door, pinning me in. He got out and yet again punched and kicked and slammed all the windows. Now let me tell you, this boy is at least 6 feet tall. He was massive. I stood no chance. I began to hop from seat to seat trying to stay away from him, to whichever window he broke out first. The whole chase lasted 17 minutes. This is when the sirens began to ring, and I broke down and cried as he ran back into his car and took up off the street. He jumped 5 fences before they managed to tackle him. He spent a weekend in a holding cell and was released on bail. My heart ached. My head spun. My mental illness had reached an all-time low, and without him I was ready to die. The situation made me want to die, but for some strange reason I still loved him. It made me sick, but I still did. He was handed a restraining order, but that didn't stop him. The day of his release he began apologizing, begging, crying, saying he had no memory of what he was doing and he was so sorry and that he would never do it again. This is the part where you're all going to hate me. I wanted to take him back. I told him I still loved him and I still spoke to him daily. He told me he wouldn't have done those things if I didn't make him so angry, and I apologized sincerely. But the jealousy and protectiveness continued. More threats. Shouldn't have called the cops and just let me kill you. I'm going to kill everyone close to you. I hope you die tomorrow. I'll laugh. The list goes on, and it took me 2 months to wake up and realize what I was doing. After he had bashed a boy that I had kissed and started doing drive-bys at places that I would hang out just staring at me. The saddest part is when I asked him what would have happened if he had broken the windows and gotten into my car, he replied with, "I honestly don't know." So girls and boys, if you ever feel mistreated, speak up. If you notice red flags, don't ignore them. A leopard never changes his spots. And if I had have stayed with him, I wouldn't be here today to tell you the horror story that was my first relationship. Story 18. This is hands down the only time in my life my gut reacted this strongly to a stranger, so I thought it was worth a share. One extremely rare day where there was no work, no class, and nice weather when I was 19, I decided to go thrifting. So I drove a few towns over to a store in a rural area where I'd always had decent luck. I decided to do a gallery wall of my bedroom and needed some cheap frames. I'm on the phone with my mom as I wander through the store. As I approach the frame aisle, I notice a 30 to 40-ish man standing alone. Not in an aisle or looking at anything, just intensely staring at me with a large, almost comical grin on his face. In the back of my mind, I recall how long I'd been in the store, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and wonder if he'd been staring at me the whole time, or did I just notice? This prospect made me feel weird, not wanting to take any chances, and believing back then I could dispel any potential weirdness with confrontation. I looked him in the face and said, "How's it going?" in a tone that I hoped implied I'm not interested in any sort of weird stuff today. He says nothing, almost like it didn't register with him. He keeps staring as I walk past, still with a huge, bizarre grin. I round up an armful of frames and begin laying them out on the floor. It's early afternoon on a weekday, and there are very few people in the store that I would be inconveniencing by spreading out. Sitting on the floor still on the phone with my mom, I notice a shadow over my work, and it dawns on me that the man not only hasn't moved on to keep shopping, he is standing over me, not saying a word. My mom picks this moment to want to hang up with me. I try to stall her, but she's at work, so I let her go. I refuse to be deterred from my mission, so I glance at him and keep arranging. But at this point the warning bells were reaching atomic levels in my brain, and I'm getting jittery. I've never had this reaction before to a stranger acting strange, so something was wrong. Still grinning and staring, he finally says, "You're pretty." "Thanks," I reply. "Where did you go to school?" I'm so nervous at this point I'm actually blurt out the truth. There are 14,000 students at my university, I think to myself. He doesn't know who I am. He would never find me if worse comes to worse. He doesn't say another word and continues to stare, still grinning. My warning bells are becoming so loud I can't focus, so I gather whatever I have on the floor and stand up to leave, pretending to answer my phone. 19-year-old me wouldn't have dreamed of abandoning a conversation without a polite exit, even with a weirdo. And I stand up, turned, and left this guy. I make my way to the checkout and pray he wouldn't follow me to wait in line. He doesn't. He leaves. Thank God. I thought, why are some people so oblivious to social awkwardness? More so, why was I so freaked out by this guy? It's not like he was the first creeper to ever creep. I stand in the longish line, inspecting my purchases. A little impressed that despite my distress, the haphazard grab I'd made yielded some decent finds. It's important to know at this point there is a main entrance at the front of the building, and a side door opposite to the corner is the front door. The parking area is an L shape surrounding the exits. My car is parked smack dab in the corner between the two exits. From any point in the store you cannot see my car. I let my gaze drift over to the side exit, where I see the man walking through the parking lot. There he goes. Weird. As he walks, he is staring at me through the door. A minute later, I see him pass by the front entrance, which makes no sense because there is no exit to the road from that direction. You can't even get to the sidewalk from there. Maybe his car is parked over that way. He is still staring at me. Another minute passes, and he has revised course to meander back past the front entrance, then past the side entrance again, the whole time still making eye contact with me as I'm waiting inside the store. It dawns on me that he is covering the exits, and possibly my car. But how would he know it's my car? Because you told him which school you go to, and your bright yellow school parking pass is hanging on your dashboard planning his day, you idiot. Being a cocky 19-year-old means you don't often realize you should be worried about some things. And yet, I'm petrified when I realize this. I did something I'd never done until then, and haven't had to do since. Red-faced and flustered, I told the cashier, because I didn't know what to do. She immediately offers a male employee to walk me to my car, and before me appears a high school friend who I forgot worked there. He grabs my bags and walks me to my car, where the man is standing by my driver's side door. My friend loads my things into the back seat, actually having to motion to this guy to get out of the way, and we make a few words of small talk while the guy stands awkwardly in our conversation, trying to appear casual and unsure now how to proceed with whatever he was trying to do. He never says a single freaking word. My friend closes the door behind me, gives the man a pointed enough look that he starts to wander away, and I speed towards the road. In my rear view, I see the man walking out of the parking lot towards the road. He hadn't even arrived in a car or with anybody. He wasn't waiting for anyone but me. When I left, his business was finished, or maybe even thwarted. I couldn't stop wondering if his plan was just continued awkward small talk until I could extricate myself, or if he wanted to leave in my car, possibly by force. Story 19. Hello. I just wanted to share this pretty frightening story that happened to me back when I was 12. I was recently going through some of my old cringy notebooks and journals with my girlfriend, and found my journal entry where I wrote about this day, and all of the memories came flooding back to me. I used to live in what I thought was a really safe and secure private community. I wasn't allowed to just wander around too far from home without supervision, but because our neighborhood was a gated community, my parents let me walk around within the gates anytime I wanted, even if they weren't home. One day I was riding around the neighborhood after school when I saw a middle-aged woman crying on the floor of her porch with the front door wide open. I was pretty concerned and got off my bike to see what was wrong. She said she was having problems with her husband, and immediately asked me to come in so I could keep her company while she calmed down. My stranger danger sirens were going off, so I declined. She kept pushing me, please, please, just for a moment. I just need someone to talk to. I was raised to always respect elders, and to be a good person, but also raised with the previously said stranger danger, so being a young, naive kid, I actually felt pretty conflicted about whether I should go in or not. Ultimately, I declined repeatedly enough that she instead asked me to at least wait outside with her and sit with her until she felt better. I agreed to this since I felt very safe in my own neighborhood. She asked me to wait on the porch for her while she walked into the house and visibly grabbed a couple framed pictures from off the wall. She then sat down next to me inside the house while I was sitting on the porch just outside her door. She started showing me the pictures. One was of a kid older than me in the local high school football uniform, and the other of a man and the same kid. She starts telling me about how this was her kid and her husband. She went on to tell me these stories of how she met him, and how they spent their honeymoon in Hawaii, and how her kid was so good at football, one of the best on his team. She was worried that if her husband and her got a divorce, she wouldn't be able to see her child anymore, and she started bawling again, this time on my shoulder. This actually caused me to let my guard down quite a bit. Once I knew she had a kid, I felt more comfortable around her for some reason. She wasn't talking for a while though, and I was beginning to start to feel a little awkward as she was on and off crying on my shoulder, and I didn't know how to react in the situation. What did I get myself into? I kept thinking as I nodded my head and pretended to listen. I was more concerned about finding a good excuse to tell her why I had to go home. She kept calling me such a nice boy, and telling me you have no idea how important it is to spend your time with me, which made me feel a little bad about just leaving. She kept telling me she wanted to reward me and make me some dinner if I just came in, which I continued to decline at that point, mostly because I wanted to leave more than being actually afraid. Finally, I told her I had to go, and she asked if I knew anything about how to turn on a cell phone as she just got her first one recently. I told her I did, and could help her out before I left. She told me to wait again, and this time left for quite a while. I kept thinking I should just walk away. But part of me didn't want to be rude, especially since she lived around the corner from my house and possibly even knew my parents. My anxiety levels would spike as I got closer and closer in my head to convincing myself to just stand up and walk away. Then it would dissipate, and I would tell myself, "Nah, you just can't leave." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she bought me her Android phone. I had only had an iPhone 3G at the time, and it was my first smartphone, so I was a little bit worried that I didn't know how to use it. I just held the power button down for a second, and lo and behold, it booted right up. She asked me then if she knew how to check text messages. I found and opened the Messages app, and there was only one number, not saved as a contact in the app. She pointed to it and said, "That's the bastard. That's my husband's number. Read me his texts." I opened it up. She had received basically the same text over and over again, just variations on "hello" and "please respond." She angrily said, "Read them to me right now. I want to know what he said to me." I tell her, they're basically just saying hello and a question mark. She just reaffirmed in a stern voice, "Read them to me." I started reading them. "Hello. Hello. Please respond." She just has her eyes closed, and she's nodding something, commenting with things along the line of "that dick. He does miss me." Well, screw him. He had his chance. She turned quickly from this crying, a distraught woman who was worried her husband would leave her, into an angry and spiteful person who felt like she was in the right. When I stopped reading a couple of times and asked if she wanted me to stop, she would snap at me. "Keep reading." Then I would continue. I started to feel like her husband was a crazy person with this many messages. I must have scrolled and read dozens of messages, almost identical, spanning back for days. My heart was racing. I felt like I was involved in something I shouldn't be involved in. I felt like I shouldn't be here. I really wanted to go home. But every time I stopped, she would get really angry and tell me to keep going. That's when I came across the first message that was "hello." It said, "Stop messaging me, you psycho, and leave me alone. I've reported you to the police and gotten a restraining order. If you come anywhere near my family, you will be arrested." My heart sank. That's when I realized all of the messages I had been reading so far were being sent from her phone. I paused in shock and she again snapped at me, "Keep reading." I told her I couldn't because it was getting late and my parents had dinner for me. She again said, "Why don't you just come in for dinner? I'll make you something. You can let them know that you were helping your neighbor. They won't be mad, I promise." Only this time she was a mixture of angry and desperate. I told her they would be worried and wonder why I was gone for so long. She pleaded a couple more times for me not to leave her. And she started crying as I stood up. Honestly, I felt really bad about it at the time. I rode my bike home as quickly as I could. My parents had just gotten home from work a little while ago and asked me where I was. I didn't tell them the truth because honestly, I was worried they wouldn't let me hang around the neighborhood anymore when they weren't home. A few days later, I came home and there were 3 police cars in front of my house. My heart sank. I asked my parents later that night if they knew what happened. My dad said, "Oh, there was just a break-in or something." I later asked one of my neighbors to see if I could get more information. Apparently, one of my neighbors fell in love with a homeless woman after inviting her in for a shower and a place to stay. He got her new clothes and a phone and was trying to help her get a job. Turns out the reason she was homeless was because she suffered from mental illness, and he kicked her out when she was starting to have delusions of this kid from a previous marriage being her kid as well. Honestly, he sounded like a real jerk. She began harassing him after this, So he left the house to his parents' house and sent the kid to his ex-wife's house because he was worried for his and his kid's safety. He had every right to, because shortly after he left, she broke a rear window of his house and came in. She had been living there for nearly a week before a neighbor noticed the broken window and called the cops. She apparently trashed the whole house by that point and was arrested. I almost didn't believe it, but actually went to look behind the house and saw the broken window. I guess the guy broke his lease and moved out immediately because he was worried she would come back after getting out of jail. I don't know if she ever did and came back, but I hope they disclose this to the new tenants. Honestly, I still get pretty freaked out to this day about what would have happened if I went in that house. Story 20. So, I grew up in Las Vegas. I moved there when I was in second grade. I was around 7 or so, and my mother was working at some sort of motorcycle repair shop in Arizona that just wasn't paying the bills at all. So, she jumped at the offer of a new job. Fast forward about 5 years. I'm in middle school and my brother and I were almost exactly 2 years apart. I was about to turn 12. So he was around 10 at the time. My mother, being quite low on the seniority list, was forced to work late nights. That left me and my brother home alone after school more often than not. Our nights were usually pretty uneventful. Usually consisted of us avoiding whatever homework we were assigned, warming up leftovers in the microwave, and watching whatever sparked our interest on TV. Which was either WWE wrestling or some kind of cartoon. We usually ended up in bed before our mom got home, but occasionally we'd wait up for her. One night, or I suppose one afternoon considering it was still light, everything was pretty normal. My brother sat on the living room floor, engulfed in whatever was on the TV. And I was using my mother's desktop computer, leveling up my character on RuneScape. Then there was a rather aggressive knock at the door, which was very odd. I was sort of an outcast child. I didn't have too many friends, nor did my brother. Not only that, we lived in what you would consider a senior living community. My mother was the youngest adult there, and was around her mid-30s. My brother, being too short to reach the peephole, doesn't move, only slightly reacts and looks at me. I get up off the computer chair and make my way to the front door to glance out the peephole. I see a man, in a black ski mask, staring at me through the peephole. It definitely didn't seem real. It sort of seemed like something from a cliché movie, as if he were dressed to rob a bank. I was immediately scared, shitless, and I obviously didn't bother asking who it was. I silently stepped away, shut off the TV, grabbed my brother on our small black Pomeranian, and ran towards my bedroom. Once we were safely hidden in my closet, I informed him of what I saw outside. He didn't say much, but was visibly shaken, and just quietly stood there holding our little dog. I slid the tiny flip phone our mom lent us for emergencies from my pocket and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator the entirety of the call, and I didn't think the man had left considering the knocks persisted after we left the living room. Yet somehow she understood me and sent an officer over. Immediately after the call ended with the operator, I dialed for our mother. I explained everything to her, and she ended up leaving work early and came home around the time that the police had as well. I'm not sure what deterred him of pursuing further, but of course, the man was gone by the time they both had arrived. The officer was very clearly not taking any of it seriously, most likely thinking that these two young boys were just paranoid from staying home alone. It was probably just a young man playing a joke on a friend, they thought. However, like I stated before, We live in a senior living community. Who could he be possibly playing a joke on? His dear grandmother. He then gave my brother and I stickers, as if that would console our nerves after seeing some masked man pounding on our door. Fortunately, I never saw the stranger after that. However, after the experience, my house did get broken into, as well as my car 3 times. Thankfully, none of us were present when any of this took place, since my family and I moved out of the state and installed a security system. Nevertheless, I hope we never meet again. Story 21. This happened when I was 14, 15. My school has an option. If it's too far for you to travel to school, you can always just stay in the hostel. You pay a certain amount monthly, and on alternate weekends, they'll let you go off to see your parents. So, this is an all-girls school, and we experienced change of guard a lot after our previous guard passed away. The late guard was a nice chap, and acted more like a grandfather to us. He was in his late 50s and early 60s, bringing us food from his wife and candies, until one day a man in his 30s took the guard's post after quite some time from the hostel being without one. The new guard was a bit off. There were times when he would walk past our study room and stand by the window staring at us. Other times, he'd stay outside the gate near the shower room smoking ciggies. It creeped us out a little, but we didn't really do much, as the wardens were all so wary that we wouldn't be able to get a new guard if they fired him, so he stayed. Whenever he was around, we got uncomfortable. We would usually just close the door to the room we were in, so that he couldn't peer inside. Fast forward a few months, our panties started to go missing. We have this place right behind our hostel block that's allocated for us to hang our laundry, to air and dry it. Some girls would soak their clothes in softener for the night, and leave their clothes, including panties, in a pail in the laundry room. So next day we wake up, and all of our panties would be missing. It went on for a few weeks, and we started getting anxious about the missing panties. It came to a point where a few girls were left with only one pair. They had to give their parents an emergency call to buy them more, and send it to the hostel. Our wardens were getting anxious too. We alerted the school and the local enforcement, but nothing was being done. We were left on our own. One weekend, 2 girls went behind the guardhouse to get some cleaning stuff. We cleaned up part of the hostel on alternate weekends, when we didn't have outings, and noticed a large garbage bag. They left it untouched at first, but when they returned to put back the brooms and mops, one girl got curious to find out what was in the bag and decided to take a look. Inside, there were heaps of our missing panties. Both girls freaked out when they saw the young guard coming towards them and yelling some profanities and asked them not to touch the bag. They both ran towards the main hostel building, straight to our warden's room. Our wardens were both alarmed and called the police straight away. Then, armed with a few burly girls, who happened to be hockey players with their sticks in hand, went looking for him. The guard, however, managed to get away on his motorcycle, but a few days later the police caught him snooping around our hostel when it was almost lights off. Turned out he had been a repeated sex offender caught a few times being a flasher around schools in the city. We were all relieved to have him locked away in jail, but also upset that our school had been so careless in hiring a guard for the hostel. Our parents demanded a PTA emergency meeting and decided that the next one they hired had to be approved through the PTA first. It was scary to imagine that this guy had the keys to almost all rooms in the hostel except for the dorms, where only a dorm leader is allowed to have the key. But imagine what nasty things he could do if two girls didn't discover those missing panties. After all, this man had been entrusted to guard us from harm, but he turned out to be the danger lurking around. I still have shivers down my spine when I think of him. Story 22. I grew up on an island in Alaska and lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house had 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up so that we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you could enter from one side and then park in the carport, and then just drive towards the exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift a cover up to get into the water tanks, and you could only enter the crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2x2 door that we kept a master lock on but never actually locked. Our dog Brewster had an area to the side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. During the summer, we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to let them on their way. We knew his barks. There were 4 of us in the family: my parents, myself, and my older brother, who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room but just once in a while throughout the day because they had similar disabilities and were able to keep up some of their general classes. But some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illness. My brother was loved by the school kids, and everyone knew him. One day, a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis had moderate Downs and he didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. Travis liked watching movies and listening to music. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said he was Ma, and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he would go into Travis' class sometimes for help with his homework. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mother let him come in but kept a watchful eye on them. Travis seemed like he didn't want him there, and my mom told Mark that we were having dinner soon and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out that he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little away. He had been in and out of foster care for most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts. I think he came over another time, and my mom felt bad for him, and she really felt as if something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mom politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone a couple of hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11 my best friends and I took a babysitting course which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together, and at age 12 started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and would always be home except for Wednesday's church service. My parents didn't drink, didn't do drugs nor smoke, and I can only remember my parents going out a few times when we were in need of a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents when they were going to be gone only a couple of hours. I was expecting them home in half an hour and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open. I thought I must not have heard the car pull up, and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get to bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs, and I call out, "Mom." Dad. And I hear the footsteps stop and I'm looking down the stairs and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This is not my parents. The way the stairs are set up, you could see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I'm scared to death and I run to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom because it's the only room that locks and has a phone. Now, I don't mean this in a rude way, but down kids can be very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed and I'm trying to keep him in the room whilst I'm grabbing a gun and I call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately and I whisper to her that someone is in the house and that I'm scared. She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'll be there. I get the courage to run down the door and I get outside. Thankfully she's in our driveway and she has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she's going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked, so she makes her way upstairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder runs off. She lets go of her dog and the dog chases the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor's boy screwing with me. We live in a safe place where the only thing you have to worry about are bears and an occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark for 15 minutes after we went to bed consistently every night. We would look out the windows and saw nothing. We figured it was bears because it was springtime and Brewster's was probably just getting used to them again. A couple of months the barking still happened. I had my best friend stay the night, and we would always stay in the downstairs so that we can be louder and stay up as late as we'd like. Kate had a brother that was 7 years older, and we'd ask him to bring us booze. All the kids were starting their vices at our age. It was a little after midnight, and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs braiding each other's hair when we both got a feeling as if someone were looking at us. We looked over and there was a guy staring into the window. We ran upstairs in panic. We thought perhaps it was her brother, but he wouldn't have come to the window and spy on us. The face also seemed a bit darker than his, but we had the lights on downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't want to wake my parents up just in case it was her brother, so we waited 13 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day we spoke to her brother and he said it wasn't him. That night Brewster's was back to barking again. 2 more months go by and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster's bark, and I looked out my window and as usual didn't see anything. I had just dozed off again and woke up to Brewster's barking frantically. I looked out my window and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to run to the road behind ours. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to get straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I'd never seen someone come out of that part of the driveway because the trail was on the south side of the house along with the crawl space and Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep and was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by and I smell smoke. I go to the hall and the smell is a lot stronger and it's starting to get hazy in Travis' room, which was directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up!" My parents are up, but Travis doesn't want to get out of bed, but thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside and the flames were pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were there rather quickly, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis' rooms because they were directly over it. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life though. I always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he'd spoken to my parents, and he said, "Hey Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked to him with tears streaming down my face, and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so hard, and I'm thinking, how is it funny that damn arson could have killed our family? So he explains what arson is. I'm still actually friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south but before the village. We had firemen for the south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and the city cops in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials, and a state trooper showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We knew he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the first odd thing she noticed was that at night she smelled sulfur. We also knew who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the first firemen who showed up at our house, and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mom had told him my description of what the person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house near the crawl space area, my dad found out where he hung out when he wasn't at the crawl space. There was a bunch of cigarette butts, soda cans, which were all found near there. But because our crawl space wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked. So my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything. By pursuing this, we could have not had a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothers me the most is knowing that he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times whilst changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he'd seen us and heard us during our sleepovers because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I'm the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything very low, and I'm scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door, and I have night terrors to this day. I'm 34 now, and I've been dealing with the anxiety since the fire and panic attacks since I was 18. Just recently I was diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a house and was put in jail. All of my childhood toys were stored in the crawl space along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. Thank you for listening, and I wish you good health. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support us. Thank you very much.